Day 1. A knock on the wall. Day 3. A chest of drawers slides across the floor on its own. Day 7. A police officer signs a sworn statement saying she watched a chair levitate. Day 30. Objects launch across rooms in front of a journalist. Day 90. An 11-year-old girl begins to speak in the voice of a dead man. Day 284. Silence. And no one in that house was ever the same again. This is 284 Green Street, Enfield, North London. Between August 1977 and June 1979, over 30 witnesses, including police officers, journalists, and researchers, documented what they described as the most sustained poltergeist activity in modern British history. Over 1,500 incidents were logged. Hundreds of hours of audio were recorded. Photographs were taken that would become some of the most debated images in the history of the paranormal. What happened in that house has been called everything from the greatest haunting ever documented to the greatest hoax ever performed by children. But after almost 50 years, the people who were there still cannot agree on what they saw. Enfield in 1977 was a quiet suburb on the northern edge of London. Working-class families, rows of semi-detached council houses, streets where everyone knew their neighbors, and nothing much happened. A woman we will call Margaret Hartley was raising 4 children alone. Her ex-husband had recently left the family. Money was tight. The house was small. 2 bedrooms upstairs, a sitting room and kitchen downstairs. The children ranged from 7 to 14 years old. The 2 oldest, sisters we will call Rose, aged 13, and Annie, aged 11, shared the smaller bedroom. It was an ordinary house, an ordinary family. And then, on the night of August 30th, 1977, everything changed. It started with the beds. Rose and Annie came to their mother's room and said their beds were shaking. Margaret told them to stop messing about and go back to sleep. The next night, she heard a heavy thud from upstairs. When she reached the girls' room, she found a large oak chest of drawers sitting in the middle of the floor. It had been against the wall moments before. Margaret pushed it back. It slid toward the door again while she was still holding it. She could not stop it. She tried. She braced her weight against it, and it moved anyway. Slowly, deliberately, as if something with more strength than a woman had decided that chest of drawers was going to the door. Margaret gathered the children and went to the neighbor's house. The Hendersons, a family who had lived on Green Street for years. Tom Henderson, a large man and a builder by trade, went next door to see what was happening. He heard it immediately. Knocking. Loud, rhythmic knocking coming from inside the walls. He checked the plumbing. He checked the structure. He put his ear to the wall and felt the vibrations in his chest. He could not explain it. And Tom Henderson was not a man who believed in ghosts. Margaret called the police. Metropolitan Police sent WPC Caroline Mills to the address. What Constable Mills saw that night would become one of the most significant pieces of evidence in the entire case. According to her signed affidavit, while standing in the living room with 4 other witnesses, she observed a chair rise approximately 1 inch off the floor, wobble, and then slide roughly 4 feet across the room, without anyone touching it. Constable Mills wrote in her official report, that she could not determine the cause of the movement. She suggested the family contact a local church or spiritual authority. The police, she explained, were not equipped to deal with whatever this was. Let that sink in. A serving police officer watched a chair move by itself, wrote it down on official paper, signed her name, and walked away because she had no category for what she had just witnessed. The next call went to the Society for Psychical Research, a London-based organization that had been investigating paranormal claims since 1882. They sent 2 investigators. The first was a man we will call Maurice Thornton, a recently bereaved businessman who had turned to paranormal research after the death of his daughter. The second was a writer and researcher we will call Guy Sheffield, an experienced investigator with a background in journalism and science. Thornton and Sheffield moved into the house, not for a weekend visit, not for a 2-day investigation. They stayed for 14 months. In the first weeks, they logged the knocking phenomena and attempted communication. They would ask questions, and the knocks would respond. 1 knock for no, 2 for yes. The responses were consistent, immediate, and seemed to demonstrate intelligence. Then the phenomena escalated. Small objects, toys, books, pens, began launching themselves across rooms. Chairs overturned. A heavy iron fireplace grate was ripped from its mounting and found in the middle of the floor. Annie would be lifted from her bed and deposited on the floor, sometimes gently, sometimes violently. Once her legs were grabbed and she was dragged across the room by something no one could see. And then, roughly 90 days into the haunting, the voice began. It came from Annie, or rather, through Annie. A deep, guttural, rasping voice that sounded nothing like an 11-year-old girl. The voice identified itself. "My name is William," it said. "I lived in this house. I died in this house. In the corner. In the chair." The investigators recorded the voice. Hours and hours of it. They asked it questions. It answered, sometimes coherently, sometimes with rambling, disjointed monologues. It described its own death in specific detail. It said it had gone blind and hemorrhaged and died sitting in a chair in the corner of the downstairs room. Subsequent research confirmed that a man matching this description had indeed died in that house years before the Hodgsons moved in. His name was William Wilkins. He died of a cerebral hemorrhage in the chair in the corner of the downstairs room, exactly as the voice had said. Annie was 11 years old. She had never met William Wilkins. She had no way of knowing how he died, where he died, or what his name was. And yet his voice came through her for months. By the winter of 1977, the Enfield case had attracted journalists from across Britain. A photographer from the Daily Mirror set up a camera in the girl's bedroom, triggered to fire automatically at regular intervals through the night. Apparently suspended in midair above her bed, her body rigid, her arms at her sides. Her sister Rose watching from the corner with an expression of pure terror. These images remain among the most analyzed and debated photographs in paranormal history. Skeptics argue they show a girl jumping from her bed. Believers point out that the body position is inconsistent with jumping, that there is no evidence of impact, and that the photographs were taken by an automatic camera with no one else in the room. Over the 18 months of activity, more than 30 people reported witnessing phenomena in the house. Neighbors, journalists, police officers, researchers, a BBC radio reporter who visited multiple times and produced a documentary broadcast in December 1978. The logged incidents eventually exceeded 1,500. Knocking, furniture movement, object displacement, spontaneous fires, pools of water appearing on floors with no source. And through it all, the voice of a dead man speaking through a child. It must be said that not everything in the Enfield case is beyond question. Annie herself later admitted that she and her sister had faked a small number of incidents. She estimated it at roughly 2% of the total. She said they did it to test the investigators, to see if they could tell the difference between the real and the staged. A magician who visited the house concluded that the voice phenomena could be replicated using ventriloquism techniques. An investigator from the Society for Psychical Research observed Annie bending spoons with her hands and striking the ceiling with a broom handle when she believed she was unobserved. Skeptics have argued that the 2% admission undermines the entire case. If the girls faked some of it, how can any of it be trusted? But the investigators who spent 14 months in the house saw it differently. Sheffield later wrote that it was as though the phenomena itself was trying to discredit the girl by producing obvious fakes in front of trained observers, as if something wanted the whole case to be dismissed. Annie herself, now in her late 50s, has spoken about the experience only a handful of times. She has said that the poltergeist never truly harmed the family, that it wanted to be acknowledged, that the worst part was not the phenomena itself, but the endless parade of strangers who came through the house. Journalists, skeptics, believers, gawkers, week after week, for over a year. "We were children," she said in an interview decades later. "We just wanted it to stop. All of it. The knocking, the voice, the cameras. We just wanted to be normal again." By the spring of 1979, the activity began to diminish. The knocking became less frequent. The voice fell silent. Objects stayed where they were put, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. 284 Green Street went quiet. The investigators packed their tape recorders. The journalists moved on, and the Hodgson family was left alone with the aftermath. Margaret, the mother, lived in that house until her death in 2003. She never moved. She never wanted to talk about what happened. Annie went on to marry, have children of her own, and live a quiet life, far from Green Street. But the house remembered. Or perhaps the world remembered for it. The case became the basis for a BBC mockumentary in 1992, a Sky television series in 2015, and the Hollywood film The Conjuring 2 in 2016, which became the highest-grossing horror film of the year. The tapes still exist, hundreds of hours, cataloged and digitized by the Society for Psychical Research. The Police Affidavit still exists. The photographs still exist. And the testimony of over 30 witnesses, given independently over 5 decades, has never been retracted. Not one of them. Professor Christopher French, head of the Anomalistic Psychology Research Unit at Goldsmiths, University of London, has studied the case extensively. His conclusion? The most likely explanation is that the phenomena were produced by the children, and that what began as a prank grew beyond their ability to stop it, fueled by the attention of investigators and media. But even French has acknowledged that the case is remarkably difficult to dismiss entirely. Too many witnesses, too much documentation, too many details that do not fit neatly into any single explanation. The voice of William Wilkins remains the most troubling element. How did an 11-year-old girl know the name and cause of death of a previous occupant she had never heard of? Ventriloquism can replicate a voice. It cannot replicate information the speaker does not possess. Unless, of course, she obtained it somehow. Through a neighbor, through a public record, through the investigators themselves, who may have inadvertently shared details, or through something else entirely. The evidence does not tell us. The evidence, as it so often does in cases like this, simply refuses to cooperate. 1,500 documented incidents, over 30 independent witnesses, hundreds of hours of audio recordings, a signed police affidavit, and a dead man's voice speaking through a child who should not have known his name. Either something extraordinary happened at 284 Green Street, or a group of ordinary people, including trained police officers and experienced researchers, were fooled for 18 months by two schoolgirls. Neither explanation is entirely comfortable. And that is precisely what makes this case impossible to close. Subscribe, because some cases have answers, and some have only questions. We bring you both. Leave a comment below. What do you think happened at 284 Green Street? Real haunting, children's prank gone too far, or something in between that we do not yet have a name for?